The mist clung to Cascade Ridge like a burial shroud, just as it had 15 years ago when two teenage girls walked into these mountains and never came out. Chen pressed her hand against her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick as she stared at whispering falls through the rain-soaked trees. Everyone said her sister Emma had fallen to her death somewhere in these peaks, that the search teams had done everything possible. But Sarah knew something they didn't. She was the former FBI profiler who'd spent her career hunting missing persons, and she'd never stopped looking for answers. The waterfall thundered down the cliff face, but today something was different. The recent storms had carved away decades of sediment, revealing a dark opening behind the cascading water that shouldn't exist. As Sarah approached, her trained eye caught something that made her blood freeze. A piece of faded pink fabric, the same color as the jacket Emma wore that final day. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped closer to the water's edge. The fabric fluttered like a wounded butterfly, caught on a jagged outcrop just inside the cave entrance. 15 years of wind and rain should have destroyed any trace of clothing, yet there it was, protected by the stone alcove that had only now been revealed. The baby shifted restlessly in her womb, as if sensing her mother's distress. Sarah placed both hands on her belly, trying to calm herself. At 38 weeks pregnant, she had no business hiking alone in these treacherous mountains, but the call from the park ranger about the cave discovery had sent her rushing here, despite her husband David's protests. Just a quick look she'd promised him that morning. "I need to see for myself." Now, standing before what might be the first real clue to Emma's fate, Sarah realized how naive that promise had been. She couldn't simply look and walk away, not when the fabric was so close she could almost touch it. The spray from the waterfall soaked through her jacket as she maneuvered around the slippery rocks. Each step required careful calculation. One wrong move and she'd tumble into the churning pool below, taking her unborn child with her. But the analytical mind that had made her one of the Bureau's youngest behavioral analysts refused to be silenced by caution. She pulled out her phone and snapped photos of the fabric from multiple angles, documenting its position and the cave entrance. The flash illuminated more of the space beyond, revealing what appeared to be a deeper cavern system. Her pulse quickened. In all the search efforts 15 years ago, no one had mentioned caves behind whispering falls. A sharp pain shot through her lower back, and Sarah gripped a nearby tree trunk for support. Braxton Hicks' contractions had been plaguing her for weeks, but this felt more intense. She breathed through it, waiting for the sensation to pass. As the pain subsided, she noticed something else that chilled her. Fresh footprints in the muddy ground near the cave entrance. The tread pattern was clear and distinct, made recently enough that the morning rain hadn't washed them away. Someone else had been here, and recently. Sarah's profiler instincts kicked into high gear. She photographed the prints, noting their size and distinctive sole pattern. A hiking boot, probably size 10 or 11. The depth of the impression suggested someone heavy, likely male. But what disturbed her most was the direction they faced, not toward the cave as if exploring, but away from it, as if someone had been leaving. The implication sent ice through her veins. If Emma's jacket was in that cave and someone had been there recently, it meant one of two things. Either they'd been protecting evidence of a 15-year-old crime, or they'd been disturbed by the cave's recent exposure. Neither possibility suggested Sarah was safe standing here alone. She tried calling David, but her phone showed no signal. The mountains were notorious dead zones, and she was deeper in the wilderness than she'd ever ventured while pregnant. The smart thing would be to return to her car and drive straight to the sheriff's office. Let the authorities handle the cave exploration with proper equipment and backup. But as Sarah turned to leave, the pink fabric caught her eye again, and she saw something that stopped her cold. Barely visible beneath the jacket scrap was what looked like white plastic, a bag or container of some kind, wedged deep into a crevice where the storms couldn't reach it. Her sister's jacket protecting something else, something deliberately hidden. The baby kicked hard, as if urging her to flee, but Sarah's feet remained rooted to the spot. Whatever was in that cave, had been waiting 15 years to be found. Now that the waterfall had revealed its secrets, how long before someone else came to claim them? Thunder rumbled overhead, promising more rain. Soon the swollen creek would make this area impassable, and her window of opportunity would close. Sarah looked back toward the distant parking area, then at the cave entrance where answers might finally lie within reach. The choice would define everything that came after. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the bracelet up to the dim light filtering through the cave opening. The silver chain was tarnished black in places, but the small heart charm still caught what little illumination reached this far back into the cavern. She'd given this bracelet to Emma for her 16th birthday, just 3 months before she disappeared. The official story had been simple enough. Emma had been hiking alone near Whispering Falls, something she did regularly despite their parents' protests. A storm had rolled in suddenly that October afternoon, making the rocks treacherous. When she didn't return by nightfall, search teams had combed the area for days. They'd found her backpack caught in the rapids downstream, torn and waterlogged. Her body was never recovered, swept away by the violent current, they'd said. But Emma's bracelet hadn't been found in the water. It had been here, in this hidden cave, 15 years later. Sarah struggled to her feet, one hand pressed against the cave wall for support, the other cradling her swollen belly. The baby had been restless all morning, as if sensing her agitation. She needed to get out, to think clearly about what this meant. But as she turned toward the narrow passage leading back to daylight, something else caught her eye. Scratched into the stone wall, barely visible in the shadows, were marks that looked almost like letters. Sarah fumbled for her phone's flashlight, cursing as the weak signal bars flickered between 0 and 1. The LED illuminated crude etchings in the rock face. Her blood ran cold as she made out the words, "Help me." Below that, more scratches. Ek Emma Catherine. Their parents had always called her Emma Cat. Sarah's breathing became shallow, rapid. Emma had been here. Emma had been alive long enough to scratch her initials into solid stone, which meant this hadn't been an accident at all. A sharp pain shot through Sarah's lower back, and she gasped, nearly dropping her phone. The baby was definitely responding to her stress. She needed to stay calm, but her mind was racing. If Emma had been taken, held somewhere, then who had done it? And why had no one found this cave during the original search? She photographed everything, the bracelet, the wall scratches, the cave itself, before making her way back through the narrow opening. The journey seemed longer this time, her pregnant body struggling with each movement. By the time she emerged behind the waterfall, she was breathing hard, and her lower back ached with a persistent throb. The afternoon sun seemed blindingly bright after the cave's darkness. Sarah sat heavily on a moss-covered boulder, trying to process what she'd discovered. She should call the police, obviously, reopen the case. But what evidence did she really have? A bracelet that could have been lost during countless teenage visits to the falls, and some scratches in stone that might be Emma's initials or might be anything else entirely. Dr. Martinez had been clear about her condition. Any day now, possibly any hour. She couldn't afford to waste time with skeptical detectives who might dismiss her claims as pregnancy hormones and grief. As Sarah stood to leave, a twig snapped somewhere in the forest behind her. She froze, listening intently. The woods around Whispering Falls were usually alive with small sounds, squirrels, birds, the rustle of leaves. But now everything was silent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Another sound, closer this time. Definitely footsteps, trying to move quietly through the underbrush. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Someone was watching her. Someone had seen her discover the cave. She forced herself to move naturally, gathering her things as if she hadn't noticed anything unusual. But her eyes scanned the tree line, searching for movement, for any sign of who might be out there. A shadow shifted behind a thick oak tree about 50 yards away, too large and too deliberate to be an animal. Fear clawed at her throat. Whoever had taken Emma might still be here, still be watching this place. And now they knew that Sarah had found their secret. She started walking back toward the main trail, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to run. Running would only confirm that she'd seen something important. Instead, she maintained a steady pace, one hand on her belly, the other clutching her phone. The signal was stronger here, 2 bars, enough to make a call if needed. But who could she call? Her husband Michael was at a conference 3 states away. Her parents had moved to Florida after Emma's disappearance, unable to bear staying in the town where they'd lost their daughter. The few friends she had left wouldn't understand the urgency, wouldn't believe what she'd found. The footsteps behind her had stopped, but Sarah could feel eyes on her back, watching her retreat. By the time she reached her car, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely get the key into the ignition. The photograph trembled in Sarah's hands as she held it up to the weak light filtering through the cave entrance. Emma's face stared back at her, frozen in time at 17, the same age she'd been when she supposedly drowned in the lake 15 minutes downstream from this very spot. But Emma wasn't alone in the picture. A man's arm wrapped around her shoulders, his face deliberately obscured by shadow. Sarah's breath came in short gasps, and not just from the pregnancy. The official story had always been that Emma went hiking alone that day, slipped on wet rocks near the waterfall, and was swept away by the current. Her body was never found, which everyone said was normal given the underground river system that fed into the lake. Case closed. Tragic accident. But this photograph told a different story entirely. She stuffed the picture into her jacket pocket and began examining the rest of the cave more systematically. The space was larger than she'd initially realized, extending back into darkness that her phone's flashlight couldn't penetrate. Along the walls, she found more disturbing evidence, scratches in the rock that looked deliberate, almost like tally marks. A rusty metal ring bolted into the stone, and there, partially hidden under a pile of rotting leaves, something that made her stomach lurch, a purple hair elastic, the same kind Emma used to wear. Sarah's knees buckled, and she had to steady herself against the cave wall as another contraction hit. They were definitely getting stronger, coming every 8 minutes now according to her phone's timer. She had maybe 36 hours before the baby came, possibly less if the stress kept accelerating her labor. A sound from outside the cave made her freeze. Footsteps on the hiking trail, moving slowly, deliberately. She killed her phone's flashlight and pressed herself deeper into the shadows, one hand protectively covering her belly. "Sarah?" The voice was male, unfamiliar. "Sarah Chen, I know you're here somewhere." Her blood turned to ice. How did someone know her name? How did they know where to find her? She'd told no one about coming here, hadn't even planned it herself until this morning's sudden impulse drove her to the waterfall. The footsteps stopped directly outside the cave entrance. Through the thin curtain of water, she could see a dark silhouette. "I saw your car at the trailhead," the voice continued, conversational and patient. "Not smart to go hiking alone in your condition. These trails can be dangerous. People have accidents." The emphasis on that last word sent terror shooting through her veins. This wasn't coincidence. Whoever this was knew exactly why she was here, what she might have found, which meant they'd been watching her, waiting. Sarah forced herself to breathe silently, fighting the urge to call out or run. The baby kicked hard against her ribs as if sensing her fear. She placed both hands on her belly, trying to stay calm for both their sakes. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the footsteps moved away, but she could hear them circling, searching the area methodically. The man wasn't giving up. He was hunting. When she was certain he'd moved far enough down the trail, Sarah crept toward the cave entrance and peered through the waterfall. The forest looked empty, but she'd learned not to trust appearances. 15 years ago, someone had made her sister disappear without a trace, and now that same someone knew Sarah was getting too close to the truth. She pulled out her phone to call Marcus, then stopped. What would she tell him? That she'd found a cave behind a waterfall with some old photograph and a hair elastic? That a strange man had somehow tracked her down and was now stalking her through the woods? It sounded insane, even to her. But the alternative was facing this alone, and with another contraction building in her lower back. She knew she was running out of time. Instead of calling her husband, she opened her camera app and began documenting everything. The photograph of Emma, the scratch marks on the walls, the metal ring, the purple elastic. If something happened to her, at least there would be evidence. As she worked, a new realization crept over her like cold water. The timing of this discovery wasn't random. Someone had wanted her to find this cave, had maybe even left clues leading her here. But why now? Why when she was days away from giving birth? The answer hit her with sickening clarity. 15 years ago, Emma had discovered something she shouldn't have. Now history was repeating itself, but this time the stakes were higher. Sarah wasn't just risking her own life, she was risking her unborn child's. Another sound from outside made her look up from her phone. This time it wasn't footsteps. It was the low rumble of an engine starting somewhere in the distance, growing fainter as it drove away. For now she was alone, but Sarah had the distinct feeling that wouldn't last long. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window as Sarah spread her findings across the dining table, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged each piece of evidence. The medallion caught the sunlight, its tarnished surface gleaming dully against the dark wood. She'd barely slept, her mind racing through possibilities and questions that multiplied like shadows. Marcus emerged from the bedroom, hair disheveled, concern etched across his features. "You're up early." His eyes fell on the items scattered before her. "Sarah, what is all this?" She looked up at him, seeing the worry creep into his expression. "I found these yesterday, in a cave behind the falls." Her voice was steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. "This medallion, it was Emma's. I gave it to her for her 16th birthday 2 weeks before she disappeared." Marcus moved closer, his footsteps cautious. "Honey, you said you went for a walk. You didn't mention any cave." "I know how it sounds." Sarah picked up the medallion, its chain sliding through her fingers like liquid silver. "But look at this, Marcus. Really look. This proves she was there. Emma was in that cave." He sat down heavily in the chair beside her, running a hand through his hair. "The police searched everywhere 15 years ago. They would have found a cave. Not this one. It's completely hidden behind the waterfall. You have to know exactly where to look." The baby shifted inside her, a sharp kick against her ribs, and she winced. "There's more. I found fabric that matches the dress she was wearing that night, and these photographs." Sarah pushed the water-stained pictures toward him. Marcus studied them with growing unease, his jaw tightening as he recognized Emma's face in several shots. These look like surveillance photos. Who would have been taking pictures of Emma? Someone who was watching her. Someone who planned this. The words came out sharper than she intended, fueled by a growing certainty that had crystallized overnight. "Marcus, what if she didn't run away? What if someone took her?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Outside, a car door slammed, and Sarah's head snapped toward the window. A white sedan was parked across the street, its driver obscured behind tinted glass. "How long has that car been there?" she asked, pointing toward the window. Marcus followed her gaze and frowned. "I don't know. Why?" "I saw the same car yesterday, after I got back from the falls. It was parked in the same spot." A chill ran down her spine as she watched the vehicle. "What if someone knows what I found?" "Sarah, you're starting to worry me. This pregnancy, the stress. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Peterson about—" "I'm not losing my mind." The words came out fierce, protective. "These are real, Marcus. The medallion, the photos, they're all real." Before he could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unknown, but the words made her blood run cold. "Stop looking or you'll end up like her." Sarah's hands shook as she showed Marcus the screen. His face went pale as he read the message, then immediately reached for his own phone. "I'm calling the police." "No." She grabbed his wrist, surprising them both with the intensity of her grip. "Not yet. If we involve the police now, whoever sent this will know. They might disappear just like Emma did. We need more evidence first." "Sarah, this person is threatening you, threatening our family." Marcus's voice carried an edge of panic. You're 8 months pregnant. This isn't the time to play detective." A sharp pain shot through her lower back, and Sarah gripped the edge of the table. The baby had been restless all morning, responding to her elevated stress levels. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, not just because of the threatening message, but because of the growing pressure in her pelvis, the occasional tightening in her abdomen. "I have to go back to the cave," she said quietly. "There might be more evidence, something that proves what happened to Emma." "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous, especially after that message." Sarah stood slowly, one hand supporting her swollen belly. Through the window, the white sedan remained motionless, its presence like a cold finger trailing down her spine. Then someone has been getting away with this for 15 years. Emma deserves better than that. The medallion felt warm in her palm as she closed her fingers around it. Somewhere in that hidden cave lay the truth about her sister's disappearance, and despite the threatening message, despite Marcus's fears, despite the baby that could arrive at any moment, Sarah knew she had to find it. The white car's engine started with a low rumble, and as Sarah watched, it pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. But the message was clear. Someone was watching. Someone knew what she'd discovered. The game had begun, and Sarah was running out of time. The photograph trembled in Sarah's hands as she stared at Emma's face, frozen in time 15 years ago. Her sister's eyes held a terror Sarah had never seen before, raw, desperate fear that made her stomach clench. Behind Emma, shadows loomed in what appeared to be the same cave where Sarah now stood, but the angle suggested there were deeper chambers she hadn't yet discovered. A sharp kick from the baby made her gasp, the sound echoing off the stone walls. She pressed her free hand to her belly, trying to calm both herself and the child within. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to reassure. The beam of her flashlight caught something else glinting in the wooden box. Sarah carefully moved aside yellowed newspaper clippings about Emma's disappearance and found a small digital recorder. Her heart hammered as she pressed play. Static filled the air, then a voice she recognized immediately, even after all these years. Emma's voice, but strained and frightened. "Day 3. I don't think anyone's coming. He says he's been watching our family for months. Knows our routines, knows when Mom works late, knows when Dad goes fishing." Emma's voice cracked. "He's been in our house, Sarah. He's touched our things. He knows about your stuffed rabbit, the one you hide under your pillow." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Mr. Buttons, she'd never told anyone about that rabbit, not even her parents. It had been her secret comfort after the nightmares started. The recording continued. "If something happens to me, if I don't make it out, someone needs to know the truth. It wasn't random. We weren't safe, and we're still not safe. He's not done with our family." The tape went silent except for Emma's labored breathing. Then, "He's coming back. I can hear the footsteps. Sarah, if you ever find this, don't trust." The recording cut off abruptly. Sarah's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the device. "Don't trust who?" The incomplete warning hung in the air like a physical presence, making the cave feel smaller, more suffocating. She fumbled for her phone to call Detective Morrison, but the screen showed no signal. A sound from the cave entrance made her freeze. Footsteps on wet stone, slow and deliberate. Someone was coming. Sarah quickly stuffed the photograph and recorder into her jacket pocket and grabbed the flashlight. She swept the beam toward the back of the cave and spotted what she'd missed before, a narrow passage leading deeper into the hillside. Without hesitation, she squeezed through the opening just as a male voice called out from the main chamber. "Sarah, Sarah, are you in here?" She recognized the voice but couldn't immediately place it. Her mind raced as she pressed herself against the cold stone wall, trying to quiet her breathing. The passage was barely wide enough for her body, made more challenging by her pregnancy. Sharp rocks scraped against her jacket as she moved deeper into the darkness. "I know you're here," the voice called, closer now. "Your car's still by the falls. We need to talk." Now she knew who it was. Deputy Martinez from the Sheriff's Department. He'd been one of the officers involved in Emma's case, though he'd been young then, barely out of the academy. What was he doing here? How had he known where to find her? The beam of a much stronger flashlight swept past the opening where she'd entered the passage. Sarah held her breath, pressing deeper into the shadows. Her baby kicked again, harder this time, and she bit her lip to keep from crying out. This is dangerous, Sarah. These old caves aren't stable. People have gotten lost in here before. The concern in his voice sounded genuine, but Emma's warning echoed in her mind. Don't trust who? A police officer would make perfect sense. Someone with access to information, someone who could cover tracks, someone the family would never suspect. Sarah forced herself to move deeper into the passage, feeling along the walls with her free hand. The air grew colder and carried a strange metallic smell that made her stomach turn. After what felt like an eternity, the passage opened into another chamber, this one larger than the first. She risked turning on her flashlight and immediately wished she hadn't. The walls were covered in photographs, dozens of them, showing her family's house from various angles and distances. Photos of her parents coming and going, of Sarah herself over the years, at school, at work, walking through town. Recent photos showed her pregnant, taken without her knowledge, from across streets and through windows. In the center of the wall was a large map of the area, with red pins marking locations around town. Her house, her parents' house, the falls, and several other spots she didn't immediately recognize. Red string connected the pins in a complex web that hurt her eyes to follow. At the bottom of the map, written in block letters, were the words, "Phase 2 begins soon." Sarah's knees nearly buckled. This wasn't just about Emma's disappearance 15 years ago. Someone had been watching, planning, waiting. And now, with her baby due any moment, Phase 2 was about to begin. The old photograph trembled in Sarah's hands as she sat in her car outside the Millbrook Public Library. Emma's face stared back at her, young, vibrant, alive, standing next to a boy Sarah had never seen before. The timestamp read 3 days before Emma's supposed death. Her sister's arm was wrapped around his waist, her smile radiant in a way Sarah remembered but had almost forgotten. The cramping in her lower back intensified as she climbed the library steps. Each movement felt labored, her body preparing for what was coming, whether she was ready or not. She had maybe 36 hours left, possibly less. Inside, the familiar mustiness of old books and aging carpet welcomed her. Margaret Chen, the head librarian, looked up from her desk with surprise. "Sarah, what brings you here? Shouldn't you be—" "I need to look at the newspaper archives from 15 years ago," Sarah interrupted, then softened her tone. "Please, Margaret, it's important." Margaret's weathered face creased with concern, but she led Sarah to the back room where the microfiche machines hummed quietly. "What dates are you looking for?" "August through September, 15 years ago." As Margaret set up the machine, Sarah felt eyes on her. She turned to see a man in a dark jacket pretending to browse the biography section, but his attention kept drifting her way. The same height and build as the figure she'd glimpsed at the falls yesterday. Her pulse quickened. The newspaper headlines blurred past as Sarah scrolled through weeks of local news. Agricultural reports, high school football previews, town council meetings, the mundane rhythm of small-town life. Then she found it. Local girl missing after fall at Whispering Falls. The article was brief, clinical. Emma Chen Morrison, 17, presumed drowned after slipping from rocks above the falls. Body not recovered due to dangerous currents. No mention of foul play, no mention of a boyfriend. Sarah scrolled forward looking for follow-up stories. There, a small piece buried on page 6 3 days later, missing girl's body found downstream. But as she read the details, her blood chilled. The body had been badly decomposed, identified only by dental records. How was that possible after just 3 days in water? "Finding what you need?" Margaret's voice made her jump. "Margaret, do you remember Emma's accident? You knew her, didn't you?" The older woman's expression tightened. Of course I knew Emma. Sweet girl, terrible tragedy. She paused, glancing around nervously. Though there were always rumors. What kind of rumors? Nothing substantial, just talk. You know how people gossip when something terrible happens. Margaret lowered her voice. Some folks said she'd been acting strange that summer. Secretive. Meeting someone her parents didn't know about. Sarah's heart raced. Did anyone know who? If they did, they never said. After the funeral, people stopped talking about it. Sometimes that's how these small towns deal with tragedy. They bury it and move on. Margaret fidgeted with her cardigan. Sarah, why are you asking about this now, after all these years? Before Sarah could answer, she noticed the man in the dark jacket was gone. A chill ran down her spine as she realized he might be outside, waiting, watching. She quickly photographed the newspaper articles with her phone, her hands shaking slightly. The baby kicked forcefully, as if sensing her distress. Each movement reminded her of the ticking clock, the narrowing window of time she had to find answers. Margaret, one more thing. Do you have yearbooks from Millbrook High, from Emma's senior year? Minutes later, Sarah flipped through glossy pages of teenage faces and forced smiles. She found Emma easily. Homecoming court, honor society, drama club. But in the candid shots scattered throughout the book, Sarah searched for the boy from the photograph. There, in the background of a football game photo, talking to Emma by the concession stand. The same dark hair, the same lean frame. She traced her finger along the bottom of the page until she found the names listed in tiny print. David Kellerman talks with Emma Morrison during halftime of the homecoming game. David Kellerman. Finally, a name. Sarah closed the yearbook and gathered her things, her mind racing. She needed to find David Kellerman, needed to understand what he knew about Emma's final days. But first, she had to get out of the library safely. She peered through the front windows. The parking lot appeared empty, but shadows between the cars could hide anything. Her own vehicle sat under a streetlight, maybe 30 yards away. She took a deep breath and pushed through the doors. Halfway to her car, she heard footsteps behind her, matching her pace. She didn't turn around, didn't run, couldn't run in her condition. Instead, she fumbled for her keys, her breath coming in short gasps. The footsteps stopped. Sarah reached her car and quickly locked herself inside. In the rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of movement near the library entrance, but when she turned to look directly, nothing was there. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging or you'll join her. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched the steering wheel, her sister's journal pressed against her swollen belly like a lifeline. The parking lot of the Millbrook Police Department stretched before her, nearly empty except for a few patrol cars glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. She'd driven here on autopilot, driven by desperation and the growing certainty that time was running out. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. Sarah winced and rubbed her side, trying to calm both herself and the child within. She had maybe 36 hours left before labor began in earnest. The contractions had been sporadic, but noticeable during the drive from the falls, a constant reminder of her ticking biological clock. Detective Ray Morrison looked up from his desk as Sarah waddled through the station doors, her face flushed from exertion and anxiety. They'd known each other since high school, though he'd been 2 years ahead. He'd been the one to break the news about Emma's supposed accident 15 years ago, his young face grave with the weight of delivering such devastating information to their parents. "Sarah, what brings you here so late?" Ray stood, concern creasing his weathered features. The years had been kind to him in some ways. He'd filled out, traded teenage awkwardness for steady confidence. But his eyes held the weariness of someone who'd seen too much. "I need to talk to you about Emma." Sarah's voice came out stronger than she felt, about what really happened to her. Ray's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something, surprise, alarm, crossing his face before settling back into professional neutrality. "Sarah, we've been through this. Your sister's case was thoroughly investigated. It was a tragic accident." Sarah pulled Emma's journal from her bag, holding it like evidence. "I found this. Emma was being stalked, Ray. Someone was watching her, following her. She was terrified in those final weeks. She watched his face carefully as she spoke, noting how his jaw tightened, how his hands clenched slightly at his sides. Ray glanced around the mostly empty station before gesturing toward a small conference room. "Let's talk in private." The conference room smelled of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. Ray closed the door and pulled out a chair for Sarah, but she remained standing despite the ache in her back. "Show me what you found," he said, but his tone had changed. Less concern, more caution. Sarah opened the journal to one of Emma's more frantic entries, reading aloud about the figure in the woods, the sensation of being watched, the growing paranoia that had consumed her sister's final days. With each word, Ray's expression grew more guarded. "Where exactly did you find this?" he asked when she finished reading. "Does it matter? What matters is that you didn't investigate properly. You wrote off her death as an accidental drowning when clearly something else was happening." Ray was quiet for a long moment, studying his hands. When he looked up, Sarah saw something in his eyes that made her stomach clench with more than pregnancy discomfort. "You shouldn't have gone looking for this, Sarah. Some things are better left buried." The words hung between them like a threat. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine despite the stuffy warmth of the conference room. "What aren't you telling me, Ray? What really happened to Emma?" "Your sister was disturbed, okay? She'd been seeing Dr. Henley for months before she died. Depression, anxiety, paranoid thoughts. What you're reading, that's the product of a sick mind, not evidence of some grand conspiracy." But even as he spoke, Sarah could see he was lying. The way he avoided her eyes, the defensive set of his shoulders, the slight tremor in his voice when he mentioned Dr. Henley's name. Everything about his body language screamed deception. "I don't believe you." Sarah backed toward the door, clutching the journal tighter. "And I'm not going to let this go." Ray stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Sarah, listen to me very carefully. You're about to have a baby. Your husband is away. You're alone and vulnerable. The last thing you need is to go chasing shadows based on the ravings of someone who was mentally ill." The threat in his words was unmistakable now. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she reached for the door handle. "Stay away from the falls, Sarah. Stay away from places you don't belong, for your own safety, and for your baby's." Sarah yanked the door open and hurried through the station as fast as her pregnant body would allow. She could feel Ray's eyes on her back, boring into her like lasers. The desk sergeant looked up as she passed, but she didn't acknowledge him, focused only on reaching her car. Once safely inside with the doors locked, Sarah sat gasping in the driver's seat. Her hands shook as she started the engine. Ray Morrison wasn't just hiding something about Emma's death. He was part of it. The musty scent of damp earth filled Sarah's nostrils as she descended deeper into the cave system, her flashlight beam dancing across jagged limestone walls. Each step sent sharp pains through her lower back, but she pressed forward, driven by the fragments of evidence she'd discovered. Emma's bracelet had only been the beginning. The narrow passage opened into a larger chamber, and Sarah's breath caught. Carved into the far wall were symbols, crude but deliberate marks that seemed to form a pattern. She approached slowly, running her fingers over the etchings. They felt fresh, not weathered by decades of cave moisture. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Martinez. "Sarah, please call me. Your blood pressure readings from yesterday were concerning." She silenced the phone and continued examining the wall. Below the symbols, someone had scratched dates into the stone. Sarah's heart hammered as she read them aloud. October 15th, 2008, November 3rd, 2015, March 22nd, 2019. Emma had disappeared on October 15th, 2008. A sound echoed from deeper in the cave, a soft scraping like footsteps on stone. Sarah froze, her flashlight trembling in her grip. She wasn't alone. "Hello?" Her voice cracked as it bounced off the walls. The scraping stopped abruptly. Sarah backed toward the chamber entrance, but another sound made her pause. Whimpering, faint but unmistakably human. It was coming from a passage she hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a natural stone column. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to run back to the surface and call the police. But what if someone was hurt? What if Emma had been kept here, in these caves, all those years ago? The whimpering came again, weaker now. Sarah squeezed through the gap behind the column, her pregnant belly scraping against the rough stone. The passage was barely wide enough for her body, and claustrophobia pressed down like a weight. Her baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. The tunnel curved sharply to the left, then opened into another chamber. This one was different, clearly modified by human hands. The floor had been leveled and covered with wooden planks. Battery-powered lanterns hung from iron hooks driven into the walls, casting eerie shadows. And there, in the corner, was a makeshift bed, fresh blankets, a plastic water bottle. Someone had been here recently. The whimpering had stopped, but now Sarah heard something worse, the deliberate crunch of footsteps approaching from the passage behind her. She spun around, her flashlight beam wavering. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was male, gravelly, echoing off the chamber walls. "Not in your condition." Sarah couldn't see him yet, but she could hear him getting closer. She looked around desperately for another exit, but the chamber was a dead end. "Who are you?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "What did you do to my sister?" A low chuckle drifted from the darkness. "Your sister was very curious too, always asking questions, poking around where she didn't belong." Sarah's hand instinctively went to her belly as a contraction began, not painful yet, but a tight band across her abdomen. "Not now," she thought desperately. "Not here." "The police know where I am," she lied. "No, they don't. You've been very careful to keep this to yourself, haven't you? Just like Emma was." The footsteps were closer now. Sarah could see the faint glow of another flashlight approaching the chamber entrance. She pressed herself against the far wall, scanning the shadows for anything she could use as a weapon. Her fingers closed around a loose stone about the size of her fist. "Why?" she demanded. "Why take her?" The man stepped into the chamber, his face hidden in the shadows beyond his flashlight beam. He was tall, wearing dark clothes, and moved with the careful confidence of someone who knew these caves intimately. "She found something she shouldn't have found, just like you did." He gestured to the carved dates on the wall. "Those aren't just random numbers, Sarah. They're anniversaries, special occasions." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "You're sick." "I'm careful. I'm patient. And I've been watching you for days, wondering if you'd be smart enough to stay away." He took another step closer. "You weren't." The contraction intensified, and Sarah couldn't suppress a small gasp. The man's head tilted. "Oh," he said softly. "This is perfect timing, isn't it? Another anniversary to add to the wall." Sarah gripped the stone tighter, but she knew she was trapped. Her body was betraying her, the baby demanding attention she couldn't afford to give. The chamber seemed to spin slightly, and she realized she was hyperventilating. "What did you do with Emma's body?" she whispered. The man's flashlight beam moved across the wooden floor, and Sarah noticed something she'd missed before. Dark stains soaked deep into the planks. "Who says I did anything with it?" he replied. The beam from Sarah's flashlight cut through the darkness as she descended deeper into the cave system. Her phone had lost signal 20 feet back, and the temperature had dropped noticeably. Each step sent sharp pains through her lower back, but she pressed forward, following the narrow passage that seemed to tunnel endlessly into the mountain. The walls here were different, smoother, almost polished. Not natural erosion, she realized with growing unease. Someone had worked these surfaces. Her light caught strange markings carved into the stone, symbols that made her skin crawl, though she couldn't understand why. They weren't random scratches, but deliberate patterns, repeated every few yards like some kind of waymarker system. A sound echoed from ahead, not quite human, not quite animal. Sarah froze, one hand instinctively moving to her belly. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her fear. She held her breath, listening, nothing but the steady drip of water somewhere in the distance. When she rounded the next corner, her flashlight illuminated a wider chamber. The smell hit her first, musty and organic, like old leather mixed with something metallic. Then she saw them, dozens of personal belongings scattered across stone shelves carved into the walls, jewelry, watches, shoes, pieces of clothing, all arranged with disturbing precision. Sarah's legs nearly gave out when her light found a familiar silver bracelet. She'd given it to Emma for her 16th birthday, just 2 months before she disappeared. Sarah stumbled forward, reaching for it with trembling fingers. The metal was cold but real, solid proof that Emma had been here. But when had these items been placed? Some looked decades old, while others appeared almost new. A child's backpack that couldn't be more than a few years old sat next to a woman's purse that looked vintage. How long had this been going on? A low moan echoed through the chamber, and Sarah spun toward the sound. At the far end, another passage led deeper into darkness. The noise came again, definitely human, definitely weak. Someone was alive down here. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get help, to not venture further into this nightmare alone. But if someone was hurt, possibly dying, she couldn't just leave them. And if there was any chance, it could lead her to answers about Emma. The passage narrowed again, forcing her to duck. The moaning grew louder, accompanied by what sounded like chains rattling. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she emerged into another chamber, this one smaller but with a higher ceiling that disappeared into blackness above. 3 wooden cages lined the far wall. 2 were empty, their doors hanging open. The third contained a figure huddled in the corner, a woman with long, matted hair covering her face. She was alive but barely conscious, swaying slightly as she sat chained to the back wall. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, rushing forward despite her terror. "Hey, can you hear me? I'm going to get you out of here." The woman's head lifted slowly. Sarah's flashlight illuminated a face so gaunt and pale it barely looked human, but the eyes that met hers were aware, intelligent, and filled with warning. "Run," the woman croaked in a voice like sandpaper. "He's coming back. He always comes back." Sarah examined the cage door. It was locked with an old-fashioned padlock, but the wood looked rotted enough that she might be able to break it. She grabbed a loose stone from the floor and began hammering at the lock mechanism. "How long have you been here?" she asked, trying to keep the woman conscious. "Don't know. Months? Years?" The woman's head lolled forward. There were others. He took them away when they got too sick, too weak. Brought new ones. The lock finally gave way with a metallic snap. Sarah yanked open the cage door and crawled inside, examining the chains around the woman's wrists. They were secured with a different lock, this one newer and stronger. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, looking around for something to break the chains. "Kelly, I think. Sometimes I forget." The woman's eyes suddenly focused with startling clarity. "You shouldn't be here. Not in your condition. He likes them young, healthy. Pregnant ones are special to him." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "Who is he?" But before Kelly could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed from the passage Sarah had just come through. Heavy boots on stone, moving with purpose. Someone whistling tunelessly. Kelly's eyes went wide with terror. "Hide," she whispered urgently. "Don't let him see you. Don't let him take you too." Sarah clicked off her flashlight, plunging them into absolute darkness just as the footsteps grew closer. In the blackness, she heard Kelly's chains rattle as the woman pressed herself against the back wall, trying to make Sarah's presence less obvious. The whistling grew louder, echoing off the chamber walls with an almost musical quality that made Sarah's skin crawl. Whoever was coming knew these tunnels well, knew exactly where he was going, and he was almost here. The old mining tunnels stretched deeper into the mountain than Sarah had imagined possible. Her flashlight beam carved through the darkness, revealing wooden support beams that groaned ominously with each step. The air grew thinner, carrying the metallic taste of rust and something else, something organic and wrong. Marcus stayed close behind her, his breathing labored. "We should go back. This place feels like it's going to collapse." Sarah pressed forward, following the narrow-gauge railway tracks that disappeared into the gloom ahead. Her baby shifted restlessly, and she pressed a hand to her belly, whispering reassurances she didn't believe herself. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, but the photograph burned in her mind. Emma's terrified face, older than she should have been, alive when everyone believed her dead. The tunnel branched ahead. Sarah paused, studying the ground for any sign of recent passage. To the left, the tracks continued straight. To the right, a rougher path led upward through natural rock formations. Fresh scuff marks on the stone caught her attention. "Someone's been through here recently," she murmured, directing her light at the disturbed dust patterns. A sound echoed from somewhere deep in the tunnels, a rhythmic scraping like metal against stone. They froze, listening. The sound came again, closer now, accompanied by what might have been footsteps. "Hide," Marcus whispered urgently, pulling Sarah toward a collapsed section where fallen rocks created shadowy alcoves. They pressed themselves against the cold stone just as a light appeared in the distance. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as the beam grew stronger, accompanied by the steady shuffle of approaching footsteps. Through a gap in the rocks, she watched a figure emerge from the deeper tunnels. It was Dr. Harrison, but not the kindly family physician she'd known all her life. This version moved with predatory purpose, dragging something heavy behind him. Sarah bit back a gasp as she realized it was a body, unconscious, not dead, judging by the occasional movement. Harrison paused directly in front of their hiding spot, so close Sarah could hear his labored breathing. He set down his burden and checked his watch, muttering something she couldn't catch. Then he pulled out a cell phone, the screen's glow illuminating his face in harsh blue light. "The Blackwood woman is becoming a problem," he said quietly into the phone. "She's asking too many questions, getting too close. We need to accelerate the timeline." Sarah's blood turned to ice. He was talking about her. "She's not due for another week, but these things can be unpredictable, especially with the right encouragement." Harrison's laugh was cold, clinical. "The buyer is getting impatient anyway. They've been waiting 15 years for the perfect match." The perfect match. Sarah's mind reeled, pieces of a horrific puzzle clicking into place. Emma's disappearance, the carefully maintained fiction of her death. Dr. Harrison delivering every baby in Millbrook for the past 3 decades, with access to medical records, genetic information, family histories. Trust me, this one will be worth the wait. Excellent bloodline, no genetic abnormalities, and the mother has proven remarkably resilient. He glanced around the tunnel as if sensing he was being watched, just like her sister was. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a sob. Emma. He was talking about Emma. Harrison ended the call and hoisted his unconscious burden again. As he turned, Sarah caught a glimpse of the victim's face in his flashlight beam. Jenny Morrison, the young mother from town, whose newborn had supposedly died of complications just days ago. But if Jenny was here, alive, where was her baby? The doctor continued deeper into the tunnels, his light fading until only darkness remained. Sarah and Marcus waited several agonizing minutes before emerging from their hiding spot. "We have to call the police," Marcus whispered. "With what proof? They'll never believe us, and Harrison will disappear everything before they can investigate." Sarah's mind raced. "We need evidence, something undeniable. Sarah, this is insane. You heard him. They're planning to take your baby. We need to get you somewhere safe." A sharp pain shot through her abdomen, doubling her over. She gripped Marcus's arm, breathing hard until it passed. The baby was running out of time, and so was she. "Follow those tracks," she gasped, pointing toward the path Harrison had taken. "But stay back. I need to see what's down there. You're in no condition." "I'm the only one who can do this." She straightened, fighting through another wave of pain. "Emma is down there somewhere. I can feel it. And if we don't stop this tonight, my baby will disappear just like all the others." The tunnels ahead seemed to pulse with malevolent life, but Sarah forced herself forward. Somewhere in the darkness waited answers that had been hidden for 15 years. She just prayed she'd live long enough to expose the truth. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the photograph in her lap. The black and white image showed a young woman who looked exactly like Emma, standing beside a man Sarah didn't recognize, but it was the date stamp in the corner that made her blood run cold, 3 months after Emma's supposed death. A sharp contraction seized her abdomen, stronger than the others. She gripped the steering wheel, counting the seconds until it passed. 37 seconds. They were getting longer, closer together. The baby was coming, whether she was ready or not. She fumbled for her phone and dialed Marcus again, straight to voicemail. Where was he? She'd left 3 messages already, each more desperate than the last. The photograph sat beside her like a loaded weapon, proof that everything she'd believed about Emma's death was a lie. The parking lot outside the Millbrook police station buzzed with activity despite the late hour. Sarah watched through her windshield as officers moved in and out of the building, their faces grim under the fluorescent lights. She needed to show someone the photograph, but Detective Morrison had made it clear she wasn't welcome. And after her encounter with Chief Bradley, she wasn't sure who to trust. Another contraction hit, this one forcing her to grip the dashboard. She breathed through it, counting again. 32 minutes since the last one. Time was running out in more ways than one. A tap on her passenger window made her jump. Marcus stood outside, his face etched with concern. She quickly unlocked the door, relief flooding through her as he slid into the seat beside her. Sarah, thank God. I got your messages. Are you? He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the photograph in her hands. What is that? She handed it to him with shaking fingers. I found it in the cave, behind a loose rock. Marcus, look at the date. His face went white as he studied the image. This can't be right. Emma died in March 2009. This is dated June 2009. She didn't die in that car accident. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Someone took her. Someone's been lying for 15 years. Marcus set the photograph down carefully, as if it might explode. Sarah, we need to take this to the police, right now. I tried calling Morrison. He won't see me. And Chief Bradley. She shuddered, remembering the cold look in his eyes. I don't think we can trust him. Then we go over his head. State police, FBI. Someone has to listen. A new voice cut through the night air. I don't think that's going to happen. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Chief Bradley stood outside her driver's side window, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. 2 other officers flanked him, their faces hidden in shadow. Step out of the vehicle, Mrs. Chen, Bradley said, his voice calm and measured. Both of you. Marcus grabbed Sarah's hand. You don't have to do anything. We have rights. Bradley's laugh was cold. Rights? You've been interfering with a police investigation, trespassing, disturbing a crime scene. I'd say your rights are the least of your worries right now. Sarah felt another contraction building, the pain radiating across her lower back. She couldn't deal with this now, not when her baby was coming, not when she'd finally found proof that Emma was alive. Give me the photograph, Sarah, Bradley continued, and we can all pretend this never happened. You can go to the hospital, have your baby, and live your life in peace. What about Emma? Sarah's voice cracked. What about my sister? Your sister is dead. She died 15 years ago in a car accident. That photograph is a fake, a cruel hoax designed to prey on your grief. But Sarah could see the lie in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he mentioned Emma's name. He knew something, had always known something. Marcus squeezed her hand tighter. The timestamp, he whispered, the metadata on the photograph. It would prove when it was really taken. Bradley must have heard him because his expression darkened. Step out of the car. Now. Sarah's mind raced. If she gave up the photograph, it would disappear forever. Any evidence of Emma's survival would vanish into police custody, buried under the same lies that had hidden the truth for 15 years. But if she refused, what would Bradley do? He clearly wasn't the man she'd thought he was. Another contraction seized her, this one so intense she couldn't suppress a cry of pain. Bradley's expression softened slightly, but his hand remained on his weapon. Sarah, think about your baby, he said. Think about your future. Don't let the past destroy everything you have. But as she looked at the photograph one more time, seeing Emma's face staring back at her across impossible years, Sarah knew she couldn't give up. Not when she was this close to the truth. Not when Emma might still be out there, waiting for someone to find her. She made her choice. The contractions were coming every 8 minutes now, each one a vice grip around her swollen belly that made her vision blur. Sarah pressed her back against the cave wall, breathing through pursed lips the way the birthing class instructor had taught her. But those classes hadn't prepared her for labor while trapped underground with a madman. She could hear him moving somewhere in the darkness beyond the chamber where she'd hidden. His footsteps echoed off the stone walls, deliberate and patient. He wasn't rushing. He knew she had nowhere to go. Sarah. His voice drifted through the tunnels, sing-song and cheerful. I know you're hurting, dear. Why don't you come out and let me help? I've delivered babies before. The thought made her stomach lurch. She pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back nausea. The beam of her phone's flashlight had dimmed to almost nothing, but she didn't dare turn it off completely. The absolute darkness down here was suffocating. Another contraction seized her, stronger this time. She bit down on her sleeve to muffle her gasp. 7 minutes. They were getting closer together. When the pain subsided, she forced herself to move deeper into the chamber. Her fingers traced along the wall until they found what she'd glimpsed earlier, more carved symbols, but these were different, fresher, and beneath them, scratched into the stone in desperate, shaking letters, Emma 2008. Sarah's heart hammered. Her sister had been here, had carved her name into this very wall. But 2008 was the year Emma disappeared, not the year she died. Sarah's mind raced. If Emma had been alive long enough to carve this. I know you found her little message, the voice called out, closer now. She was quite the fighter, your sister. Took 3 days before she finally gave up trying to escape. 3 days. Sarah closed her eyes, imagining Emma trapped down here, alone and terrified. But Emma had been smart. If she'd survived 3 days, maybe she'd left more than just her name. Sarah ran her fingers along the carved letters, feeling for anything else. There, just below Emma's name, almost invisible scratches. Not letters, but numbers. 1 to 4, 2 to 9. A date, coordinates. Sarah's pregnancy-fogged brain struggled to make sense of it. Then she heard the scrape of boots on stone, much closer now. He was in the tunnel leading to her chamber. She looked around desperately. The chamber was small, maybe 10 feet across, with only the one entrance, but there had to be another way out. Emma wouldn't have just carved her name and waited to die. She would have kept fighting, kept looking. The beam of a powerful flashlight suddenly flooded the tunnel entrance. There you are. Sarah spun around as he stepped into the chamber. In the harsh light, she could finally see his face clearly. Deputy Marcus Henley, Sheriff Crawford's right-hand man. The officer who'd been first on the scene when Emma's car was found. Who'd helped search for her body. Who'd comforted Sarah's family at the funeral. You look surprised, he said, smiling. Did you really think you could come down here poking around and I wouldn't notice? I've been watching this place for 15 years. Why? Sarah gasped as another contraction began building. Why did you take her? Take her? Marcus laughed. Oh, sweetheart, you still don't understand. Emma came here on her own. She was always so curious about the old stories, the missing girls. Just like you. She found this place just like you did. The only difference is she came alone. The contraction peaked and Sarah doubled over, crying out despite herself. When it passed, Marcus was standing closer, his eyes gleaming in the flashlight beam. Emma discovered something she shouldn't have, he continued conversationally. Old bones, you see. Girls who'd vanished over the decades. This cave system goes on for miles. Such a perfect place to dispose of things you don't want found. Emma was going to ruin everything, so you killed her. Eventually, his smile widened, but not before she told me all about her little sister. How protective she was of you. How she'd do anything to keep you safe. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What did you do? I made her a deal. Her life for yours. She could die quickly and I'd leave you alone forever, or she could try to run, and I'd make sure something terrible happened to her baby sister too. The chamber spun around Sarah as the truth hit her. Emma had sacrificed herself, had chosen to die to protect her. And I kept my word, Marcus said. For 15 years I never touched you, but then you just had to come looking, didn't you? Had to disturb the peace. Another contraction, stronger now. 6 minutes. Sarah's baby was coming whether she was ready or not. Don't worry, Marcus said, pulling something from his belt. In the flashlight beam, she saw the glint of metal. This will all be over soon, and then you and Emma can be together again. The flashlight beam trembled in Sarah's grip as she descended deeper into the cave system. Behind her, Marcus moved with practiced silence, his breathing barely audible over the echo of water dripping somewhere in the darkness ahead. The passage had narrowed considerably, forcing them to move single file through what felt like the Earth's own throat. There, Marcus whispered, his voice carrying an edge of excitement that made Sarah's skin crawl. Do you see it? Ahead, the tunnel opened into another chamber, this one smaller than the first, but with an artificial quality that became apparent as they emerged. The walls weren't natural rock formations. They'd been carved, shaped by human hands over time. Ancient symbols covered the surfaces, painted in what looked like rust-colored pigment that Sarah desperately hoped wasn't blood. But it was the altar at the center that stole her breath. The stone platform rose from the chamber floor like an accusation, its surface stained dark with substances Sarah didn't want to identify. Around its base, personal belongings lay scattered in careful arrangement, jewelry, watches, pieces of clothing. Even in the dim light, she could make out the glint of her sister's silver bracelet among the offerings. Emma, she whispered, her voice breaking. Marcus moved past her with reverent steps, approaching the altar as if it were a shrine. She was special, your sister. Chosen. Just like you've been chosen now. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly as the baby shifted restlessly inside her. The contractions had been growing stronger during their descent, each one a reminder of how little time she had left. What is this place? Sacred ground, Marcus said, running his fingers along the carved symbols. The Order of the Whispering Veil has used this chamber for centuries. Your family's land sits on one of the oldest ritual sites in the region. Did you never wonder why your ancestors chose to build here, so close to the falls? The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity, the missing persons reports she'd found, all dating back generations, the strange accidents that seemed to plague certain families in the area, her own grandmother's warnings about staying away from the falls after dark. You killed them all, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength despite her fear. Emma, and how many others? Marcus turned to face her, and in the strange light cast by their flashlights, his features seemed transformed. The kindly professor facade had fallen away completely, revealing something predatory underneath. Killed? No, Sarah. Transformed, elevated. The ritual requires willing sacrifice, yes, but it grants so much more than it takes. Emma would never have been willing. Your sister fought beautifully at first, Marcus admitted, circling the altar slowly, but in the end she understood. As you will understand, the child you carry, it's part of the prophecy, a blood offering born of the chosen bloodline. Sarah backed toward the tunnel entrance, but the sound of footsteps echoing from that direction made her freeze. Someone else was coming down the passage, someone whose heavy breathing and awkward gait suggested they weren't entirely stable. Dr. Reeves thought he could stop us, Marcus continued conversationally. Thought his research into the old disappearances would expose our work. But the Order has eyes everywhere. When we realized he'd shared his findings with you, well, accidents happen so easily to pregnant women. The footsteps grew closer. Sarah could hear muttering now, a low voice repeating words she couldn't quite make out. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing the danger surrounding them. My colleagues will be joining us momentarily, Marcus said, checking his watch. We've been preparing for this moment since the day your sister was taken. 15 years of careful planning, Sarah. Your pregnancy, your discovery of this place, none of it was coincidence. Sarah's mind raced. The helpful librarian who'd guided her to the newspaper archives, the convenience store clerk who'd mentioned seeing Dr. Reeves asking questions, even her decision to explore the falls today, how much of it had been her own choice, and how much careful manipulation. "The timing has to be perfect," Marcus explained, approaching her slowly. "Birth during the ritual creates a conduit between worlds. Your child will open doors that have been sealed for generations." Another contraction hit, stronger than before, and Sarah doubled over with the pain. When she looked up, Marcus was standing directly in front of her, something metallic glinting in his hand. "Don't fight this, Sarah. Your sister tried to run, tried to escape her destiny. Look how that ended." The footsteps reached the chamber entrance. Sarah turned to see a figure emerge from the tunnel, disheveled, wild-eyed, carrying what looked like ceremonial robes draped over one arm. But it wasn't another cultist as she'd expected. It was Sheriff Crawford, his uniform torn and stained, his eyes reflecting the flashlight beam like an animal's. "Is it time?" he asked Marcus, his voice thick and strange. The voices, they won't stop whispering. Sarah realized with growing horror that she wasn't facing just one madman, but an entire network of believers who'd been planning this moment for longer than she'd been alive. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness as Sarah descended deeper into the cave system, her breathing echoing off the damp stone walls. Every step sent sharp pains through her swollen belly, but she pressed on, driven by the horrifying realization that her sister might still be alive somewhere in this underground labyrinth. The tunnel branched ahead, splitting into 3 narrow passages. Sarah paused, placing her hand against the wall to steady herself as another contraction gripped her abdomen. She couldn't have more than hours left before the baby came, and she was running out of time to find Emma or whoever had taken her. A sound echoed from the leftmost tunnel. Not the drip of water or settling stone, but something else. Something that made her blood freeze, humming. A woman's voice, soft and melodic, drifting through the darkness like a lullaby. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the tune. The same song Emma used to sing when they were children, the one their mother had taught them before she died. Sarah switched off her flashlight and crept forward in the blackness, one hand trailing along the wall for guidance. The humming grew louder, accompanied now by the soft scrape of movement. As she rounded a bend, she saw a faint glow ahead, candlelight flickering against the cave walls. The passage opened into a small chamber, and what Sarah saw there made her stomach lurch with horror and disbelief. The space had been transformed into a crude living area, blankets spread across the floor, canned goods stacked against the walls, and dozens of melted candles creating pools of hardened wax on rocky ledges. But it was the figure hunched in the corner that stole Sarah's breath. A woman sat with her back turned, long dark hair falling past her shoulders as she rocked back and forth. She wore a tattered dress that might once have been white, and her bare feet were caked with dirt and dried blood. In her arms she cradled something small and pale. "Emma?" Sarah whispered. The humming stopped. Slowly, the woman turned around, and Sarah's world tilted on its axis. The face that looked back at her was unmistakably Emma's, but aged and gaunt, with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at her. And in her arms, Sarah bit back a scream. The thing Emma held wasn't alive, hadn't been alive for a very long time. It was a crude doll made from bones and scraps of cloth, yellowed with age and wrapped in what looked like a baby blanket. "You came," Emma said, her voice hoarse and strange. "I knew you would come when it was time. Emma." "Oh God, Emma." Sarah took a shaking step forward. "I thought you were dead. I thought, what happened to you? Who did this?" Emma smiled, but there was no recognition in her eyes, no spark of the sister Sarah remembered. "He told me you would come when the baby was ready. He said we could be a family again, all of us together in the deep places where no one can hurt us." "Who told you that?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Emma, who's been keeping you here?" "The man who saved me." Emma's grip tightened on the bone doll. When I fell that day, when everyone thought I drowned, he pulled me from the water. He brought me here where it's safe, where we can wait for our babies to be born." Horror washed over Sarah as the pieces fell into place. Emma hadn't died in the falls 15 years ago. Someone had taken her, kept her prisoner in these caves and twisted her mind until she believed her captivity was salvation, and now that same person wanted Sarah's baby. "Emma, listen to me." Sarah fought to keep her voice steady. "We need to leave, right now. I can get you help, get you back to the real world." "No," Emma's shriek echoed through the chamber. "You don't understand. He protects us here. Out there, the babies die, but here they're safe forever." She held up the bone doll, its empty sockets seeming to stare accusingly at Sarah. "My baby is safe here. Your baby will be safe too." Footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind Sarah, slow, deliberate steps that sent ice through her veins. She spun around as a shadow fell across the chamber entrance, but the candlelight wasn't strong enough to reveal who stood there. "Welcome home, Sarah," a man's voice said from the darkness. "Emma's been waiting so long to meet her nephew." Sarah's water broke in a warm rush down her legs, and she doubled over as the strongest contraction yet tore through her body. The baby was coming now, ready or not, and she was trapped in an underground nightmare with her broken sister and the monster who had destroyed both their lives. Emma began humming again, rocking her bone baby as Sarah's labor pains intensified and the shadow in the doorway stepped closer. Sarah's contractions were coming every 12 minutes now, each one stealing her breath and sending white-hot pain radiating through her swollen belly. She gripped the steering wheel of her car, parked outside the Riverside Medical Center, and tried to focus on the building's familiar brick facade instead of the fear clawing at her throat. Dr. Elizabeth Garrett would be inside, probably finishing her evening rounds. The same Dr. Garrett whose signature was on Emma's medical records. The same woman who had treated Emma's supposed accident injuries 3 days before she disappeared. Another contraction seized her, and Sarah doubled over, gasping. The baby was coming whether she was ready or not, but first she needed answers. She'd left Marcus back at the house with Detective Rivera, both of them poring over the evidence from the cave. The photographs, the medical records, the journal entries, everything pointed to Dr. Garrett's involvement, but they needed proof. Real proof that would hold up in court. Sarah hauled herself out of the car, one hand supporting her belly, the other clutching the folder of copies she'd made. The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical whisper, and she stepped into the sterile brightness of the hospital lobby. "Can I help you?" The receptionist looked up with practiced concern, her eyes immediately going to Sarah's obviously pregnant state. "I need to see Dr. Garrett. It's urgent." Sarah's voice was steadier than she felt. "Are you having contractions? I can get you to labor and delivery right away." "No." Sarah gripped the reception desk as another wave of pain hit. "I need to see Dr. Garrett first. Tell her it's about Emma Chen." The receptionist's expression shifted, confusion replacing concern. She reached for the phone, dialing an extension. "Dr. Garrett? There's a woman here asking to see you about someone named Emma Chen." Sarah watched the receptionist's face change as she listened to whatever Dr. Garrett was saying on the other end. "She'll see you. Take the elevator to the 3rd floor, turn left, office 312. The elevator ride felt endless. Sarah leaned against the wall, timing her contractions, 11 minutes apart now. She had maybe 2 hours before things got serious, maybe less. Office 312 was at the end of a quiet hallway. Sarah knocked, and a familiar voice called out, "Come in." Dr. Elizabeth Garrett looked exactly as Sarah remembered from her own prenatal appointments years ago. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of competent maternal presence that inspired trust. She was older now, with deeper lines around her eyes, but her smile was the same. "Sarah Chen, I wondered when you might come to see me." Dr. Garrett gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please, sit. You look like you're in discomfort." Sarah remained standing, clutching the folder. "You know why I'm here." I imagine it has something to do with your recent exploration activities. Word travels fast in a small town. Dr. Garrett's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. How are your contractions? Every 10 minutes or so? The casual mention of her contractions sent ice through Sarah's veins. You've been watching me. I've been watching over you. There's a difference. Dr. Garrett stood up slowly, moving around the desk. Your sister was very much like you, you know. Stubborn. Determined to uncover things better left buried. Sarah's hand went instinctively to her belly as another contraction began. What did you do to her? I tried to help her, just like I'm going to help you. Dr. Garrett opened a desk drawer and Sarah saw the glint of a syringe. Emma came to me when she found out she was pregnant, scared, alone, desperate for options. She was pregnant? The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. 3 months along. But the father, well, let's just say it would have been complicated for everyone involved if that information had become public. Dr. Garrett's voice remained calm, clinical. I offered to help, a simple procedure, completely confidential. But Emma changed her mind at the last minute. Sarah backed toward the door, but her legs felt weak. The contractions were getting stronger, more frequent. So you killed her. I sedated her. The plan was to complete the procedure while she was unconscious, then let her wake up believing she'd miscarried naturally. But there was a complication, an allergic reaction to the sedative. Dr. Garrett moved closer, the syringe held casually at her side. She died before I could reverse it. And you covered it up, made it look like an accident. I panicked. I was young, had just started practicing. One mistake would have ruined everything I'd worked for. Dr. Garrett's mask finally slipped, revealing something desperate and dangerous underneath. I moved her body to the cave, staged the fall. It should have stayed buried. Sarah's hand found the door handle behind her. Who was the father? Dr. Garrett smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Sarah had ever seen. Why don't you ask your husband? The world tilted. Sarah yanked the door open, but Dr. Garrett was already moving, the syringe raised. Another contraction hit, doubling Sarah over, and she felt the sharp sting of the needle entering her neck. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision as she collapsed to her knees, the folder scattering across the floor. The cabin stood before Sarah like a monument to her nightmares. Even in the pale moonlight she could see the decay that had claimed it. Rotting boards, a sagging roof, windows dark as dead eyes. This was where Marcus had brought Emma 15 years ago. This was where her sister had drawn her last breath. Sarah's contractions had been coming every 8 minutes for the past hour, each one stealing her breath and sending lightning through her swollen belly. She pressed her hand against the cabin's weathered door, feeling the rough wood beneath her palm. Behind her, the forest whispered secrets she was finally ready to hear. The door opened with a groan that seemed to echo through the trees. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mold and something else, something sweet and cloying that made her stomach turn. Sarah fumbled for her phone's flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a single room frozen in time. Camping gear lay scattered across the floor, a sleeping bag, empty food cans, a Coleman lantern. But it was the wall that made Sarah's blood run cold. Photographs covered every inch of the far wall, hundreds of them, all of Emma. Pictures from school, from home, candid shots taken from a distance. At the center hung Emma's missing necklace, the silver locket their grandmother had given her, suspended from a nail like a trophy. Sarah stepped closer, her breathing shallow. Some of the photos showed Emma in places Sarah remembered, at the mall, walking home from school, sitting by Whispering Falls. Others were taken inside what looked like this very cabin. In those images, Emma's eyes held a terror that reached across 15 years to grip Sarah's heart. A loose floorboard creaked behind her. Sarah spun around, her flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. "Hello?" Her voice cracked. "I know you're there, Marcus." Silence stretched between the cabin walls like a held breath. Then, from the shadows near the door, a figure stepped into her light. But it wasn't Marcus Chen. "Hello, Sarah." Detective Ray Morrison's voice was calm, almost gentle. I was wondering when you'd find this place. Sarah's mind reeled. Morrison stood in the doorway, blocking her only exit, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. The man she'd trusted, the man who'd promised to help find Emma's killer, watched her with eyes that held no warmth. You? The word came out as barely a whisper. But Marcus, the evidence. Marcus was convenient, Morrison said, stepping into the cabin. A lonely kid with an obvious crush on your sister. When Emma disappeared, it was easy enough to plant some evidence, make it look like he'd taken her. Too bad he had an alibi for that night. Another contraction gripped Sarah, doubling her over. She pressed her back against the wall of photographs, Emma's eyes watching from every angle. You killed her. Emma was going to ruin everything. Morrison's voice hardened. She saw me that night at the Hendricks place. I was just supposed to plant some drugs, make it look like a deal gone wrong for the insurance money. But she was there, taking pictures of the waterfall in the moonlight. Said she was going to tell. Sarah's legs trembled as the contraction subsided. So you brought her here? She fought, Morrison said almost admiringly. Kept saying her sister would come looking for her, that you'd never give up. His laugh was cold. 15 years later, she was right. The flashlight shook in Sarah's grip as understanding crashed over her. The Hendricks house fire. You set it up for the insurance money. Emma witnessed you committing arson. The Hendricks were already dead when she saw me, Morrison said. Car accident 3 months earlier. I just needed to make their deaths profitable for certain parties. Emma was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sarah's mind raced even as another contraction built in her belly. Morrison had been feeding her information, guiding her investigation, always one step ahead because he'd orchestrated everything. The anonymous tip about the cave, the convenient discovery of Marcus's old belongings, it had all been leading to this moment. You've been watching me, she gasped. Following me. Had to make sure you found what I wanted you to find. Though I'll admit, you were more persistent than I expected. Just like Emma. Morrison pulled out a pair of zip ties. I'm sorry about the baby, Sarah, but you've seen too much. The contraction hit with savage intensity, and Sarah cried out, doubling over. As Morrison moved toward her, she saw her chance. Her hand closed around the Coleman lantern on the floor, its metal base heavy and solid. When Morrison reached for her, Sarah swung with everything she had. The lantern connected with his temple, sending him staggering backward. She didn't wait to see him fall. She ran for the door as another contraction seized her, knowing with terrible certainty that her baby wasn't waiting any longer. The forest swallowed her scream as she plunged into the darkness between the trees. The abandoned mine shaft plunged into absolute darkness, and Sarah's flashlight beam barely penetrated the gloom ahead. Her contractions were coming every 8 minutes now, each one forcing her to grip the rough stone wall until her knuckles went white. She couldn't wait any longer for backup. Whoever had taken Emma was down here, and they knew Sarah was coming. The tunnel branched in 3 directions. Sarah chose the middle path, following the faint sound of running water that echoed from somewhere deep below. Her phone had lost signal the moment she descended, leaving her completely cut off from the world above. Emma, she whispered into the darkness, her voice swallowed by the cave's oppressive silence. I'm coming. The passage narrowed, forcing her to turn sideways to squeeze through. Sharp rocks caught at her jacket, and she could feel the baby pressing against her ribs with each labored breath. The air grew thicker, laden with the smell of damp earth and something else, something organic and wrong. A sound stopped her cold. Footsteps, deliberate and measured, coming from behind her. Sarah clicked off her flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the weak glow of another light source. Sarah! The voice made her blood freeze. It was Detective Morrison, but something in his tone had changed completely. Gone was the helpful, concerned officer. This voice carried authority, ownership, satisfaction. You really shouldn't have come down here alone. She forced herself to remain still as his flashlight swept past her hiding spot. In the brief illumination, she glimpsed something that made her stomach lurch, a collection of personal items, arranged on a natural shelf in the rock, a pink hair scrunchie that looked exactly like Emma's favorite, a class ring, a child's sneaker. Morrison continued past her position, his light bobbing as he moved deeper into the mine. Sarah waited until the sound of his footsteps faded before switching her flashlight back on and following at a distance. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, and she could hear voices now. Morrison's authoritative tone, and another voice, higher, pleading. "Please, I've been good. I've done everything you asked." Sarah's breath caught. The voice was older, damaged by years of captivity, but underneath the fear and broken syllables, she could hear an echo of the sister she'd lost. Emma was alive. Another contraction seized her, stronger than the others, and Sarah bit down on her sleeve to keep from crying out. She couldn't give birth here, not now, not when she was so close. She fumbled in her jacket pocket for her phone, hoping desperately for even one bar of signal, but the screen showed nothing. "You know better than to hope for rescue," Morrison was saying. "Your sister is just like you were, too curious for her own good. But don't worry, she'll be joining us soon enough." Sarah crept closer to the edge of the chamber. Below, she could see Morrison's light illuminating a horrific scene. The chamber had been turned into a makeshift living space. A sleeping bag, canned goods, a camping stove, and chained to the far wall, barely recognizable but undeniably alive, was Emma. Her sister had survived 15 years in this underground prison. Her hair was long and unkempt, her clothes little more than rags, but her eyes still held intelligence, still held fight. When Morrison's back was turned, Emma's gaze swept the chamber and locked onto Sarah's hiding spot. For a moment, neither sister moved. Then, Emma's lips formed a single word, "Run." Instead, Sarah began her descent into the chamber, using the natural handholds carved into the rock face. Her contractions were coming faster now, every 6 minutes, and she could feel pressure building in ways that meant the baby was coming whether she was ready or not. Halfway down, her foot slipped on loose stone. The small avalanche of pebbles echoed through the chamber like gunshots. Morrison spun around, his flashlight beam finding her immediately. "Ah, Sarah, right on time." His smile was visible even in the harsh LED light. "I was wondering when you'd make your grand entrance." Sarah dropped the remaining few feet to the chamber floor, landing hard. The impact sent another contraction ripping through her, this one accompanied by a warm rush of fluid down her legs. Her water had broken. "Emma," Sarah's voice cracked as she looked at her sister properly for the first time in 15 years. Emma was thinner, marked by her ordeal, but alive, incredibly, impossibly alive. Morrison reached for something at his belt, not his service weapon, but a large hunting knife that gleamed in the flashlight beam. "Family reunions are so touching," he said, stepping between the sisters. "Too bad this one will be rather brief." The next contraction hit with the force of a sledgehammer, and Sarah realized with crystal clarity that her baby was coming now, in this underground hell, with her sister chained to the wall and a killer blocking their only escape route. The contractions hit like lightning as Sarah stumbled through the cave entrance, her flashlight beam dancing wildly across the stone walls. Behind her, footsteps echoed, heavy, determined, gaining ground. She pressed her back against the cold rock, trying to control her breathing, trying to think through the pain that radiated from her swollen belly. "Sarah!" Marcus's voice bounced off the cavern walls, closer than she'd hoped. "You can't run forever, not in your condition." She bit back a scream as another contraction seized her, stronger this time. The baby was coming, whether she was ready or not. Her free hand fumbled for her phone, but the screen showed no signal bars. The cave's depth had swallowed any hope of calling for help. Moving deeper into the darkness, Sarah followed the narrow passage she remembered from her previous visit. Her sister's journal, clutched against her chest, felt like both a lifeline and a burden. Everything was in there. Emma's discovery of the trafficking ring, her plans to expose Marcus and Sheriff Brennan, her final desperate entries before she'd vanished 15 years ago. The passage opened into the larger chamber where she'd first found Emma's belongings. Now, in her panicked state, Sarah saw details she'd missed before. Scratches in the stone walls, not random marks but deliberate gouges. Emma had been here, alive, after her supposed drowning. She'd been imprisoned in this very cave. "I know you're in here, Sarah." Marcus's voice was maddeningly calm. "Your sister tried to hide too. Look how that worked out for her." Sarah's legs trembled as she crouched behind a boulder, the flashlight switched off. In the absolute darkness, every sound amplified. The drip of water somewhere in the depths, her own ragged breathing, the scrape of Marcus's boots against stone. Another contraction built slowly, and she pressed her fist against her mouth to muffle any sound. The beam of Marcus's flashlight swept the chamber, pausing on the very rock that concealed her. Sarah held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. The baby shifted inside her, a foot or elbow pressing against her already tight skin. "Emma thought she was so clever," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a conversational tone that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Writing everything down, playing detective." She never understood the scope of what she'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about a few missing kids from town. This was a pipeline that stretched across 3 states. The flashlight beam moved away, and Sarah exhaled silently. She needed to get out of the cave, but Marcus stood between her and the only exit she knew. Her mind raced through the journal entries she'd memorized. Emma had mentioned other passages, deeper caves that connected to an old mining system. As if reading her thoughts, Marcus laughed. "The old mine shafts." Emma tried that too. Half of them collapsed decades ago. The others just lead deeper underground. No cell service, no way out except through me. Sarah's water broke with a warm rush that soaked through her jeans. Panic clawed at her throat as she realized she was out of time. The baby was coming now, in this god-forsaken cave, while a killer hunted her in the darkness. She fumbled for the spare flashlight she'd brought, switching it on and immediately regretting the decision. Marcus's head snapped toward her position, his eyes reflecting the light like an animal's. "There you are." His smile was all teeth. "Let's finish what your sister started." Sarah ran. The narrow passage beckoned ahead, barely wide enough for her swollen body. Behind her, Marcus cursed as he squeezed through the opening. Her advantage was slim. She was smaller, more desperate, but also laboring and exhausted. The passage twisted left, then right, then opened into another chamber. This one was different, older, with wooden support beams that spoke of the mining operations Marcus had mentioned. Sarah's flashlight caught something else, fresh air moving through cracks in the rock face. Another way out. She pulled at the loose stones, ignoring the pain that shot through her hands. The opening was small, but she was smaller now than when she'd entered, the baby having dropped lower in preparation for birth. "Sarah!" Marcus's voice echoed from the passage behind her. "You're only making this harder on yourself." The stones gave way, revealing a shaft that angled upward. Sarah could see stars through the opening far above, blessed, beautiful stars that meant freedom. She hauled herself up just as Marcus burst into the chamber below. His hand closed around her ankle. For a moment, they struggled in silence, Sarah clawing at the rocky shaft walls, Marcus trying to drag her back down. Then another contraction hit, so powerful that Sarah's scream echoed through both chambers. And in that moment of agony and desperation, she heard something impossible, sirens in the distance, growing closer. Tom had found her phone. Tom had called for help. With strength she didn't know she possessed, Sarah kicked free and hauled herself up into the night air, into safety, into the beginning of everything she'd been fighting for.